Welcome to Everyday Linux User. In today's video, I'm going to talk about how you really go about learning Linux. So the first thing that people think about when they learn Linux is which Linux distribution should I choose? And you can see in front of you there are 50 Linux distributions, and these are the top 50 Linux distributions that are on distrowatch.org. So how do you go about choosing which one of these is the most suitable one for you? Well, you could go to distrowatch.org and you could open the links and read about them, or you could view the videos on this YouTube channel for the top 15 that I've done thus far, and that's one way of deciding which Linux distribution to choose. I've broken their distributions down into different groups on what their base distribution is. So as you can see, the most popular one that Linux distributions base themselves on is Debian. Out of the top 50, almost half of them are Debian based. 9 are Arch, 9 independent, and then you've got a few for Red Hat, a couple for OpenSUSE, and a couple for Puppy Linux. So what that says to me is you should be choosing either a Debian or an Arch-based distro. So one of the pitfalls that new users fall into is they'll decide that I don't want to use Windows anymore, or I want to try Linux out. And so they go online and say, which distribution should I use? And whether they use Google, whether they use Facebook, whether they use any other user group, the reply they'll get is use this distribution, use Mint, use Ubuntu. You don't want to use Ubuntu. Ubuntu's rubbish. You want to use Arch. Don't use Arch. Arch is too difficult. Don't use Arch. Use Debian. You should use Debian. You should use Mint. You should use KDE Neon. You should use Kali. And the number of people that I see on Facebook groups that ask about installing Kali Linux, and it's incredible. I mean, unless you really have a need for those tools within Kali, you should not be using that as your daily driver. So a new user is blindly installing distributions which may or may not be suitable. And then what happens? So the user tries out the distribution and they hit a problem. For instance, they've got 2 gigabytes of RAM, they've got really old hardware, or they're using a mini PC and they've installed GNOME or KDE. They use it, GNOME in particular becomes clunky, because GNOME is a decent desktop environment, but you need better hardware to use it. And same with KDE to a certain degree. I mean, KDE doesn't feel quite as heavy as GNOME, but it's still got a lot of features to it, and therefore it's not necessarily the best for older or underpowered computers. It might be that the user's chosen a desktop environment they don't like, so they've installed Linux Mint, and Linux Mint comes with Cinnamon, and they go, oh, I really don't like that desktop environment. I wanted to get away from that Windows look and feel, with the start button and all those sort of things. I wanted something more modern. So they go, what should I do? Or the person tries to use one of their devices, like they can't connect to the internet. They can't use Bluetooth, they can't use their printer. They're trying to run Steam and they can't get their games to work. They want to install packages, but the package they're looking for doesn't exist in the package manager of the distribution that they are using. The user still wants to use Linux, but they've decided the one they've installed is the wrong one. So what do? They go back to Facebook, they go back to Google, and they alter their questions slightly and they say, which distribution should I use? I've tried ABC Linux, but it didn't work. And then round and round it goes. So that's why people distro hop. So how do you choose a distribution? Well, this guide isn't specifically about choosing a distribution. I mean, this channel obviously reviews lots of distributions, and it's not about me telling you And it's not about distro hopping, it's about trying to find each person the distribution that works for them. So you can watch 20 of my videos about different reviews, but it's about trying to find the distribution that works for you. It's not necessarily about try Ubuntu, then switch to Debian, then switch to Mint, then switch to Fedora. You don't have to try them all out. You can just, once you find one you like, stick with it and then try and work your way through the pitfalls. I mean, distrowatch.com I've used since I very first started using Linux, and it's a great resource. One, it tells you what the new distributions there are out there, but it links to reviews and it tells you what they're based on. It tells you what you can expect when you install that distribution. So I think that's a great resource. And if you're going to try Linux for the first time, if you've got a machine powerful enough to do it, use virtual machines and give it enough oomph to try out the distribution that you're going to try. The next thing is, if you hit a problem, like the Wi-Fi doesn't work or you can't find the package you need, don't just throw that distribution away and go back to DistroWatch or back to this site, find another distro to try. Yes, if you've chosen from the top 50 and you've chosen distro 49 on that list, it might not be suitable. So in that case, you might decide that actually one of the more mainstream distributions is what I need to be using. Which brings me to my last point, is try to use a distribution which has a large user base. If you choose something that's got a large user base, then chances are the problems that you hit will have been found by other users and more likely to have a solution. And guess what? A lot of these things are probably documented as well. So if you really want to learn Linux, pick a base distribution. And my next comment says steer clear of independent distributions. So you could try PC Linux OS, you could try Mageia, and don't get me wrong, PC Linux OS has been a great distribution in the past. I've never been overly fond of Mageia, but I know there are people that use it. But the trouble is that they have less user base and the package management that they use is less common, and it's only linked to that one distribution. So you could go and learn Mageia and you could learn all the intricacies of everything that works with Mageia, and that might be great if that's all you're ever going to use. But if you then end up using a different distribution down the line, you have to learn that whole new distribution. Whereas if you choose something like Debian or Arch, then you can go to any one of the other Debian based distributions or Arch based distributions, and what you've learned thus far will work on those other distributions as well. So I think Debian or Arch is the great starting point because they have great documentation. And it's based on your skill level as to which one of those you want to start with. Now, Debian has a decent wiki, and so does Arch. Arch's wiki is a lot better than the Debian one, but then Arch is a lot more... it is more tricky to set up in the first place than Debian is. So there's a trade-off. You've got Debian, which is a slightly easier learning curve, but the documentation, it takes a little bit of working through to find everything you need, whereas Arch, you've got all the documentation in one place, but you have to do a bit of reading. And the use community of each differs slightly. Debian, you can ask a question and they're not quite so quick to ask, have you read the manual? Whereas Arch users will say, they'll point you to their manual and say, have you read this? And neither's right, neither's wrong. It's just the way things are. So as I say, documentation. Debian has a great wiki, which can be found at wiki.debian.org, and Arch has a great wiki, which can be found at wiki.archlinux.org. So I've got those open here. So this is the front page of the Debian wiki, and you've got a guide here that shows you how to install Debian. And it's got lots of different pages here, how to create a USB drive, how to boot from a USB drive. Now obviously on this channel I'm going to show you how to do that as well. I'm not going to leave you just to read pages. And then you've got the Arch one, and it's got everything about the distribution, frequently asked questions, an installation guide, recommendations. But then you can get into things like how to install applications, desktop environments, and all those sort of things. Uh, as I said before, choose a base distribution. But when you install it, if you really want to learn Linux, just install the base distribution. Don't choose a desktop environment. So if you're using Debian, for instance, go for the minimal install, and don't pick a desktop environment. Don't pick any of that stuff. Just go for the base distribution. And then gradually build things up. Install all the components bit by bit. And by doing that, you'll learn a lot more of how things work. And then your level of learning becomes a lot better than simply, I've installed Ubuntu, it doesn't really work the way I want it to. I've installed Mint, it doesn't work the way I want it to. By installing the desktop environment or window manager, configuring it yourself, really learning how they work, that's how you're going to get better at Linux. So I'm going to talk about a few of the components of Linux. This is not complete by any means, but it'll get you started on the road. So so when you first install most distributions, you come with a desktop environment. So Ubuntu comes with GNOME, Linux Mint has Cinnamon, and Fedora has GNOME, but you can have KDE ones like Ubuntu. KDE Neon has KDE as well, and they've got XFCE ones for MX, Linux, etc. So a desktop environment essentially is built up of many things. So I'm going to go back to my own desktop here. So here's my desktop environment. So I've got VirtualBox running in the background, and that's another thing. So this is just a base base Ubuntu install. So the window manager basically handles how your windows appear on the screen and stuff like that. And then you've got panels. So a desktop environment will include a panel, which is what I've got at the top, and you can see I've got two panels. I've got a docking panel at the bottom with the system tray. It's got your menus, but a desktop environment quite often comes with extra tools like your file manager and a terminal emulator included in as part of it. So when you install a desktop environment, you get a whole lot of tools. Now you may or may not like the tools that they install. For instance, XFCE comes with the Thuna file manager. You might not like that file manager. You might want to use a different file manager. You might have another one that you really like. So desktop environments may or may not be the thing that you want to use. So if you install the base Debian image, you will be at a command line, so you won't have a desktop environment installed by default. So there's various things you can do. So okay, I'm using Ubuntu and I've had to install this, but if I do sudo taskcell, I can pick any one of these environments, and so I pick that, and then you tab to OK and press OK, then that would install the LXDE environment. I'm not going to do that. And another thing you can do is type apt show task desktop, and you can see if I want to install the GNOME desktop, I run apt install task GNOME desktop XFCE. I type that KDE LXDE, and so if I want to install a desktop, I can just run apt install and any one of these desktops, and it will install that desktop. It's worth installing things like LC utils as well, because that'll get your audio working. And if you want a web browser, you could always install Firefox. But you don't have to install the web browser at this point. That could be a separate command later down the road. So a desktop environment, you get a bundle of tools, and some of them may or may not be suitable for your needs. If you've got 90% of what you want from a desktop environment, then you might want to go down that route. So XFCE is a great one because it's highly customizable and you can tweak it. I mean, you can always install the tools you want and uninstall the ones you don't want, but that's what you get from a desktop environment. You can build up your own desktop environment, and so you can install your own window manager, your own panels, and your own terminal, your own file managers, etc. So you can build it up how you want. Now you have to be careful they don't conflict with things, so that one thing doesn't work well with another. but that's part of the learning experience. So I've got a virtual machine here, and this virtual machine is running IceWM, and you'll see it's got a very Windowsy theme, but you can also change the theme on IceWM to any one of these other ones. So I could choose crystal blue, for instance, and then it becomes like this, and you can right click on the desktop. The great thing about a window manager like this, if I open a terminal and I type top, for instance, you'll see that the memory usage is absolutely tiny. So that's 374 megabytes of RAM. So compare that to my current desktop environment now. I am running XFCE. So what I'll do is I'll shut down the virtual machine. If I allow for the fact that I've got a screen recorder running and I've got a browser open, but the memory used is 1.2 gigabytes. Now, an XFCE is a lightweight desktop environment, so make what you will of that. So window managers might be the way to go for certain people. So common window managers, OpenBox, IceWM, Fluxbox, Awesome and i3. You will need to be patient if you're using window managers. Whilst they're highly customizable, you're going to be reading documentation and you have to be willing to experiment. So again, I recommend a virtual machine, install the base distribution, install a window manager, see how it works for you, see how easy it is to customize, and then go from there. But there are benefits. Memory usage is just one of them. After you've installed a window manager or desktop environment, there's the display managers. Now, if you install the XFCE desktop environment, the chances are you're going to get a display manager installed as part of that. But essentially, these are the display managers available. And so what is a display manager? Display manager shows you your login screen. So when you first get to, say, Lubuntu, you'll see a login screen and you type in your username and password, and then the display manager is used to manage user sessions in that computer. Of course, you don't have to have a display manager. If you're only ever going to be the only person using the machine, you can just have the login from the terminal, and as soon as you enter the password, it can run the window manager or desktop environment straight from your bash file. And then we're on to the subject of package management. So one thing, if you really want to learn Linux, stop using the graphical desktop tools, use the command line package managers, because once you've learnt how to use those, you'll find that your whole Linux experience is so much better, because you're not reliant on a tool that comes with a distribution. So for Debian, you're going to need to learn apt and apt-get. Now all you've got to do is go into a terminal and look at do man apt, and then you've got a whole thing of documentation there telling you what to do. For Arch, you've got Pacman or Yay, Red Hat, Fedora, you've got DNF and Yum, and OpenSUSE, you've got Zippo and DNF. Command line package managers will help you install all the applications you need. So if you think you've installed a base distro, you're not going to have a graphical package manager. So even if you want to install the graphical package manager, the first command you're going to have to learn is the command line tool to install that graphical package manager, like for KDE, Discover, for GNOME Software Center. Now it might be that, and you'll need that to even install a desktop environment in the first place. So learning the command line package managers is a great thing to do, and it's one of the first things you should learn how to do. And on top of that, it might be every so often you can't find the package you need, so it might be a good idea for you to learn how to install Flatpak and also the FlatHub repo, and that will give you access to installing Flatpaks. Now, whether you want to do that in the future or not, that's entirely up to you and your use cases. And for completeness, you might want to learn how to install snaps. and you can see that's not a typo up it, but this is a not nice to have. I'm not a big fan of snaps, but in the future maybe they'll become the next big thing. So learning how to use them and not using them is better than not learning how to use them and not knowing anything about them. So after you've installed, you've got Package Manager, you've got your desktop environment, you're now able to log in, and so you've got a blank canvas of all the software you need, and you're getting to a point where your Linux experience is getting good. But now you need your hardware to work. If you install Debian, your Wi-Fi should work straight away, but it might not if you've got a new hardware driver. If you've got a new piece of hardware, then it may not be part of the kernel. Maybe the Wi-Fi is just not working at all. Don't give up. It would be easy to say, I can't get that working, I'm just going to install Ubuntu. That's it, I'm done. But you haven't learned anything by doing that. If you use the resources that you've got available, the Debian community is huge, so is the Arch one. If you use that community, if you use Google wisely, if you use YouTube wisely, if you use all the documentation, you'll find the answer you're looking for. And the same goes for Bluetooth and printers. For printers, you'll want to install cups, and if you use a HP printer, you'll want to install the HP lib software, because that will get HP printers working. And obviously you want to make sure your audio is working as expected, and if you have a microphone, you want to test that as well. And we're coming to the end. This is very much a theory session, so not much practical today. But this leads up to what's coming next on this channel. Now, I've done some Ubuntu videos previously. I've done the top 15. I plan to go to the top 20, and I will get there, but I wanted to take a break and do something different. And so here we are. I'm going to install a base. I'll show you how to install a base distribution, so you can get to the Debian terminal, and you'll have a user set up, and that's your starting point. I'll show you how to set up users, how to set up sudo, how to set up root user, your user, etc. And then in another video, I'll show you how to install different desktop environments. And then in another video, I'll show you how to install and configure a set of window managers, things like OpenBox and ISWM. I'll show you how to install display managers, so that you can have login sessions. And then I'll show you how to install the most common software, so web browsers, audio players, office software, things like that. And then how to set up hardware, so we'll look at Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, printers and other audio, etc. And that's it really. So subscribe to Everyday Linux User, because you'll need that to see what's coming next. And if you like this video, hit the thumbs up, and you're in for a bumpy ride if you continue with this, because we're going to learn Linux from the ground up. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time on Everyday Linux User.